right, everybody. Welcome to the Vibin Higher Podcast. I'm your host, Trevor, and today I've got a really cool conversation for you guys. I sat down and talked to Jason Martell and Amish Shah. Now, Jason, a lot of you guys are going to know from the History Channel show and one of my favorite shows, Ancient Aliens. Jason's work focuses on things like, obviously, the Ancient Astronaut theory, ancient artifacts, ancient technologies, as well as things such as Planet X or Nibiru, and the structures on Mars, the face and the pyramid. And Amish is a successful entrepreneur who has also had a deep interest in these topics for quite a while now. They've recently teamed up to form something called Ancient Explorers, which we'll get into in the podcast, but they did talk a lot about a forthcoming documentary that I'm really excited to see, entitled Dwarka, Atlantis of the East. So I think with that, we'll just go ahead and jump into it. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining the show. First off, I was wondering if we could firstly just get a little background on the both of you. I know a lot of our listeners are going to know Jason from Ancient Aliens, obviously, and Amish, you've got a rich background as well. A lot of people in the tech world, marketing world are going to know you, but could we get a little bit deeper into that for the audience?
Sure. So basically, my background has always kind of been entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur since 2000. I mean, pretty much since I was a kid, but for real, like 2004, 2005, when I quit my job and just had a string of kind of bunch of different companies that did tech-related stuff, marketing stuff, information type of products, software products, and got very successful very quickly. And, I think that was the kind of learning lesson that kind of like happened to me along my way and made me realize like all that stuff on the outside that I was like kind of filling my life with wasn't really important, and I wanted something deeper. And that was kind of what led me to go to Dwarka, because I was like, what am I spending most of my time researching? And it was always like things about like these ancient like locations around the world and the meaning of them, and like, just things that aren't conventional, like history, I guess you could say, and then really understanding where the history of humanity like is and where it lies. And I always found myself researching more of that, and that's kind of where the birth of like this whole documentary kind of started. So, it's kind of like went from this kind of like this marketer, entrepreneur kind of guy, now just settling down into this new kind of, world of just we call it Ancient Explorers. That's kind of what the whole mission, I guess, is, or the vision is moving forward, to helping humanity understand where history actually came from and the pieces, and helping kind of plug those gaps along the way. So, I've done a lot of different things in technology, from apps to marketing to all different kinds of things. But, this documentary is like a lot of time and research has gone into it. It's about 7 years worth of research. And then, we started this thing, and I kind of bumped into Jason through similar channels, and it was kind of interesting. And, we came together and we started talking about some of this stuff, and we were like, wow, like there's a real synergy here as to like what we're doing and the information that we're providing.
Absolutely. And I can say from my perspective, you guys might be able to speak to this a little bit better, but there's seems to be a growing interest for this type of information. And like you said, Amish, just sort of people want to know what the real beginnings of humanity were. Yep.
And so, the documentary is a piece about an ancient civilization, or a location that was once mythical, and it was written in the Mahabharata, which is an ancient text. And it was at some point just kind of just like, whatever. It's like just some people who wrote some song, And later on, they started finding proof of, these things are starting to like pop up in India. They're showing up. They're like, wow, like maybe this book was real. And so Dwarka played an important role in the Mahabharata. It was like it was a location where an ancient war occurred, and the ancient war, like millions of soldiers died in just a span of a couple of days. And they talk about all this interesting technology that had taken place during the war. And, that's what kind of just led me further and further and further into like researching this. And I found that they did excavations in what is modern day Dwarka, which was, they said that obviously the temple that's there right now was rebuilt after it was submerged under the sea. And so they found a temple that was from 900 AD, and they did some research on it, and they excavated it, and they kind of got it out of the ground, and they made, they kind of brought it back to life, kind of. And the sea, where all of it was, kind of like submerged, was all right there. And they just started doing the excavations. And by it's the, Oceanographic Institute of India and, the Archaeological Survey. They both kind of teamed up and went out there. And they did some of this like amazing work. They've used 4 different types of dating to get some stuff. They dated stuff that went back 5,000 years, 7,000 years. There's references to things that have been, dated back 20,000 years, some of it, and you're just like, wow, like, did this really exist around the time that this supposed book was written, the Mahabharata? And, that just kind of led me to dig further. And so the story just kind of just goes on. And a couple of years later, I couldn't find anyone to really give me a proper answer, I guess. And so I just decided to really just get up and just go out there myself. And I don't even know how to explain it. I didn't plan on making a documentary. It was kind of like a nonprofit that my wife and I started, and that was going to be the first place for us to go out and discover. And that's how it all started. There was a guy at the hotel that happened to film, and, he came out and just shot me for the next 8 days and just recorded my journey. And it was like, wow, I don't even know what I'm going to do with this. I guess I have to do something about this.
Wow.
And that's how it started. Like, quite literally, that's how it like started. It was just I was out in Dwarka. I was by myself, completely by myself. I didn't know a soul. And it took me like so long to get there. And that was my whole journey. And like, they filmed my journey while I was out there, and it was an interesting journey. And so through astrological references that were dated in the Mahabharata, they were put together by Dr. Narahari Achar, and they dated it back to 3067 BC that this great war took place, and that they had King Salva was the opponent of Krishna, which was the city of Dwarka, where Krishna supposedly lived and had his, his abode, basically, was where he lived. And they said that King Salva came from outer space or the universe or whatever you want to say in a flying machine, and they battled off the coast of Dwarka, and Krishna shot the machine down into the waters over there. And so in the 90s they stopped the excavations early, like around 2000. They stopped the excavations, and this led, again, 2 years ago, led me on this journey. I was like, why would they stop the excavations on this whole story about all of this stuff? And so I went on this trip, and I, went on to discover as much as I possibly could. And, it just wasn't enough. We need like a bigger movement to go in and kind of see what's out there and what's been discovered, and, really discover what's beyond where we've been. I think they've only been like 200 feet out or 300 feet out. And, that's kind of like nothing compared to how far we can go out nowadays.
Yeah. So this is really the culmination of years of work on your part, and it sounds like there's certainly an Ancient Astronaut twist to this, being that the Dwarka was the mythological home of Krishna, you say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Krishna is sort of one of those sky god characters that you might hear about on Ancient Aliens. So there seems to definitely be that sort of aspect of it to the whole story.
There's a correlation, exactly, and it was just very profound to be like, all right, this appears everywhere, and Jason has a lot of knowledge, around this and how it appears across all other ancient cultures, how it spans time, and the information that we're discovering is just so powerful, and it's just like, all right, we got to go and really just go in and discover more, and figure out what's going on. And there's proof of all this kind of stuff, whether it's through verbal tradition that they've passed down from year over year, thousands and thousands of years, whether it's written in these ancient scriptures. There's astrological references written in these scriptures that actually point to this war and tell you exactly where it is and what's going on, and these machines that appeared 17 times in the Mahabharata. Like, it's pretty crazy.
Is that the Vimana, the machines that you're speaking about?
Yeah, the Vimanas. And there's plans. Like, there's quite literally plans on how to build these things.
Definitely
written out
fascinating.
in ancient Sanskrit, there's plans on how to build these Vimanas of flying machines. And there's 3 kinds of Vimanas, actually. So there's ones that are internal. So they say that they used to use their spiritual energy and they were able to basically astral project and fight celestial wars through that. And then they had another one, which was a metallic version. And then it had a deck and it had a pit and it was powered by Mercury. And it was, it's wild.
And these sort of things, obviously in the United States, are sort of taboo, although we're seeing sort of a change in that department. But correct me if I'm wrong, it's somewhere like in India where Dwarka is at, it's not so taboo to think that maybe there was some sort of visitation thousands of years ago, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's well, there is a little bit of taboo in India. The archaeological digs, the reason why they stopped it, there is a taboo in the sense of it's a political, religious thing instead of a historical thing for them. And they have enough money to do it. They have enough proof to assert that this is once upon a city that they talk about in the scripture, so why not dig more? There was proposals done to preserve it and turn it into a preservation historical location with the underwater museum and everything. And all of that just disappeared. No one's paying attention to it.
So that's where I know that it speaks in the trailer, which I think the trailer and the you can sign up for the free screening at ancientexplorers.com, right?
Yep, ancientexplorers.com.
All right. The cover-up aspect of it, at some point, I guess in the early 2000s, late 90s, the interest, especially coming from the Indian government, sort of went away. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. They just we just stopped looking. And then, there was just a lot of, I just heard a lot of weird things. Like, one of the guys that I went to in Vadodara, he told me, the guy that led the excavations went missing for a while, and, he just kind of stopped writing books about it, and, I don't know, if any of this is true, but this is what I'm hearing from one of the guys, and then I hear from another guy that nothing happened, and, he's fine, and here's his, I misplaced his number, but he's okay, and weird things just started happening around the situation while I was traveling in India. And I don't know if it was a cover-up or what it is or what's going on, but, I hear other guys who are professors at universities that I've interviewed, and he told me, there's something there, and we should be looking, and I don't know why we're not. And, we need to basically go in there and find what it is. What is it? What's down there,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it certainly raises questions when there seems to be some sort of interest, and they're doing digs, and they're getting out there and trying to figure out what's going on, and then it just sort of ceases.
Exactly. So it makes you question it, and I'm really curious about it, and this all started. It's funny because I used to. There's this temple in New Jersey actually called Dwarka Dish Temple, and I used to go when I was younger with my parents, and that's how this whole thing started. And I was just like, why am I going here? At some point in your life, you're like, what am I doing? What is this? Okay, I come here, they do the ritual, and I'm done, and I go home, and I go back on the street and play basketball,
Mm-hmm.
But later on in life, you're just like, okay, what does this all mean? And that's what kind of sparked my whole curiosity to research it more, and all this interesting stuff came up, and yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, all of this type of stuff has huge ramifications as far as our history and the things that we sort of take for granted and just take at face value that we're taught in history books are really pretty world-changing if found to be true, at least from my perspective. Is there any evidence of any advanced technology at Dwarka at this point, or are we just looking at a site that is obviously thousands and thousands of years old?
They've found coins. They've found these huge stone anchors that were obviously not been able to been built by man. There's scriptures from one of the oldest written hieroglyphs on the planet. So there's definitely proof of that. Whether they've actually found anything, I mean, we don't know. It's not been published.
Well, I certainly think that we should be getting in there and trying to get to the bottom of this type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and actually, I wanted to get back into that. You were talking about that battle. It actually speaks to that in the Mahabharata, that it actually gives numbers of I think it's 4 million dead in 18 days. Is that right?
Yeah, it was like a wild number. And so they talk about other kinds of ancient technology where they say that Krishna shot basically a ground-to-air missile, which took the plane or the machine or whatever you want to call it, and it submerged it under the sea. And it came into the world like a roaring comet. Like that's quite literally like the translations. And it lit up the night sky like a roaring comet. Like quite literally, that's what it said. And then you're just like, what is that? And it could be anything. I mean, who knows? Maybe it was like a asteroid or something. I mean, it's pretty wild though, the way that they talk about this technology, and they talk about weapons that they've used with like ray weapons, and like, how they can use rays to manipulate energy and attack the opponent with them. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's pretty unfortunate that society in general nowadays sort of tends to think that, we're so technologically advanced at this point, what were these ancient peoples talking about? They couldn't have had anything along those lines, and just sort of write it off. But you have to wonder, I mean, what if they were really writing down what they were seeing? I mean, I think that it tends to be more likely that they were writing down what they were seeing instead of just completely fabricating something.
Well, what makes it even more interesting, again, is the astrological references. The astrological references that they say only happen, every 100,000 years, or like, whatever, according to the time cycle, and so this was the astrological references that were dated in the Mahabharata during the war were 3067 BC that this kind of event took place.
Mm-hmm. Jason might be able to speak to this a little bit. I was wondering how.
I can. Yes, that's actually. I'm silently listening in awe of this information here and making a couple notes because yes, I mean, as you're going to see, guys, I mean, that 3000 BC date coincides with several other cultures around the world describing these interaction with beings that seem to always come down from the skies. So, again, when we look at the sacred information coming out of the Mahabharata, it appears to be ubiquitous that other cultures, for instance, like the Sumerians, at the same time frame of 3000 BC, are recording these events with these interaction of their own type of gods they called Anunnaki. So, yeah, as we'll kind of dive into this tonight in the limited time we have, there are many connections. As Amish has been able to dive into Dwarka at a more intimate level and being hands-on on the scene there, what we're seeing is that there's connections from technology and geodetic locations, astrological information. It all kind of ties together to kind of fill in more gaps on this view of our ancient past.
Yeah, absolutely. My next question was actually how something like Dwarka would relate to something that, like, the title of the documentary is actually Dwarka, Atlantis of the East. I was wondering how it would compare to something like Atlantis, obviously, that we hear a lot about, or Lemuria, which we still hear less about, but even more, I think, than Dwarka.
Well, here's how I'd answer that. And again, this is the beauty of these types of topics and why they need to be explored is certain people have opinions on this, mainstream science, and then there's alternative views. And really what we're starting to see, Trevor, is that mainstream science lacks the actual funding to do serious research. Some of the latest research coming out about our ancient history, sites like Göbekli Tepe and various other locations around the world, like Easter Island, Rapa Nui, and these various remote places, what we're starting to see is that there's definitely a connection with let's call it a lost culture. Now, right now, we would call that, oh, Atlantis. There was some lost high civilization and their continent sunk into the ocean. No, more than likely they were a global civilization. And what we're seeing is that all the ancient cultures that we revere today, the Mayans, the Egyptians, Sumerian, Aztec, all of the ancients that we revere today, they all seem to have knowledge from some lost civilization. Some lost civilization that's possibly not entirely human. We don't know. But the facts are starting to stack up to point to some lost ancient culture with very high technological math and astronomical knowledge that's spread to all the ancient cultures that we're aware of today.
Yeah, in fact, I was just speaking to somebody about this today, and their question was, well, what do you think is the best piece of evidence? And I'm not an expert. I've been a fan of this subject for a few years now, but my answer was that it wasn't so much one thing, such as maybe the Nazca lines or the Giza pyramids, but that it was just kind of the weight of all of these things at once.
That's one answer. I actually have. I've gotten that question several times, more phrased around the show Ancient Aliens. What's the biggest piece of evidence to prove ancient aliens, man?
Yeah.
And I try and tell them that, well, there is one piece of evidence that our science is seeing over and over at these ancient sites, and it's called vitrification. Vitrification simply means the heating of a stone until it becomes in a lava-like state. And so what we're seeing is a lot of these ancient sites, a lot of them in South America, Pumapunku, Teotihuacan, Sacsayhuaman, they all have these stones. Machu Picchu, great example. They have these stones that are so well fit together, you can't even slide a piece of thin paper between them. And the way they seem to have done this was through a process called vitrification, which means if you could take a stone and heat it to a point where it becomes almost like a lava-like state, then it's like putty. You can carve it, sculpt it, put the stones together, and then they harden into place. So what we see around the world is this evidence of a high heating of stones like granite and diorite. And that really raises the question as to how ancient man was heating stone to the point where it was in a lava-like state so they could sculpt it in these intricate fashions that we see.
And now that's obviously something that can't be done over a campfire. And I think, is it something that is actually a byproduct of nuclear energy, or is it?
We don't know. It just means high heat, a glassing effect of the stone having been heated to a point where you can now smudge it and move it. It's a clear sign of a heat level being applied. As an example, the Sinai Peninsula, we see evidence of a glassing all over the Sinai Peninsula, what the ancients called a place of where literally battles of the ancient gods took place. Huge explosions, possibly nuclear weapons. Now, if you show a geologist this vitrification all over the Sinai Peninsula, they say, oh, well, there must be volcanic activity there. You say, there are no volcanoes in the Sinai Peninsula. So they just kind of raise their hands in the air and say, well, then I don't know. So this evidence of vitrification at some of the ancient sites, whether it be, like you said, nuclear energy being expelled, or being used to actually sculpt stones, really raises a lot of flags for further investigation.
Yeah. Well,
there's also Mohenjo-Daro, that has like nuclear activity, like it has nuclear. You can measure the nuclear energy off of it, and it's this ancient civilization that's actually. That's right underneath, I guess you could say, where Dwarka was and all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting, that whole area. And it's funny that the whole Atlantis of the East topic came up too, because, Atlantis of the East, the reason why we call it Atlantis of the East is because it was like the same kind of city. Krishna was said to have lived in this city that had 900 palaces all made out of gold. And, I know gold is another huge topic that also comes up too, is why was everything focused around gold? And, it's really interesting that this whole Lemuria, thing is kind of around that whole area. And it's really cool. Jason brought up some good, interesting points.
Yeah, and there's some connections to gold with the Anunnaki and a lot of the stuff that's said about perhaps the human race was actually created in order to mine gold for the
Yes.
Anunnaki.
Yep. And you know what? We can definitely touch on that topic. I'd like to squeeze in one more little factoid.
Yeah, go for it.
For Dwarka's importance here too, which just popped into my head. See, Dwarka potentially has two Manhattan-sized cities off the coast of Dwarka. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Amish, but is there potentially, like, off the shore of Dwarka, potentially cities, like literally Manhattan-sized cities that are literally still submerged?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things definitely that, as an example, we could apply for the Dwarka research is some of the tools that are available through space sciences actually can benefit archaeology. NASA, as an example, developed some software. They have it running in a huge 747. It's called synthetic aperture radar. And what they did was they flew this 747 with synthetic aperture radar over an area in Cambodia and recently discovered some pyramids that were like covered by jungle and trees. This synthetic aperture radar has the ability to do ground penetrating radar and give you a visual sense of depth. So looking under trees or shrubs and jungle, or even possibly under the ground or under the seabed of water, there are tools that we can deploy to look at areas, let's say like around Dwarka, in a series of radius kilometers or miles, and deploy this type of radar and actually find possibly symmetry and mathematical patterns that point to us going to a certain location to look at further underwater. Have you though?
Yeah, well, hopefully with especially the increasing popularity of subjects like this, as technology advances, we'll be able to do something like that. Now, we find that a lot of these ancient sites are located along these ley lines or have some sort of astrological layouts. Is there anything? Does Dwarka have any components like that we know of?
If it sits on ley lines or anything like that, I don't believe that I've ever actually looked to see if there's a correlation between ley lines, but I don't believe it runs on a major ley line.
Okay.
Well, the interesting thing here, Trevor, like, I just want to kind of give a little bit of background about how Amish and I got involved in this. Again, when we talk about going to some of these sites and doing things with, let's say, NASA as a partner, these are real things that we're trying to pursue, and this is really why I feel good about exploring these topics with Amish. Amish's background in business and being able to form partnerships is really crucial to being able to do more than what I could do on my own. I have a lot of extensive knowledge from studying these ancient cultures, just as Amish has a personal interest. But with the two of us combined, we're really going to tackle this from a global perspective, bringing people along, but also involving the right resources, whether that be NASA or Virgin Galactic or what have you. And so I really have to at least give, a big high five to Amish for releasing this documentary, because we're going to go down a path, Trevor, where we're going to invite the public to come along with us, and not only make it just a trip, but a community of people where we can share in these experiences. Some people can travel along, some people can't, but most of us will have access to the internet and be able to really stay involved in these topics. So you asked me before the show, Trevor, about ancient school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my involvement with Ancient Aliens in that show comes from my background in studying the Anunnaki and Sumerian and various other ancient cultures. And we'll talk about that gold significance and the topic. But really, it's about exploring these topics at the highest level that we can, with integrity and the resources available to us. And really that steps out of mainstream's capability, Trevor. So I'm very excited to partner with Amish, and essentially what I've done is Ancient School, what I've launched is, with my network of researchers and people that I'm connected with through the show Ancient Aliens and through my own time of studying these topics, Amish and I are merging our resources, and we're going to have a stronger approach at being able to, bring people along with us and get involved in the research. So to answer your question, Ancient School is literally becoming Ancient Explorers, and Dwarka is really the first step forward.
It's just one site of many that we were going to explore and create documentaries and, education behind it. Sorry, Jason, to cut you off. Do you mind?
Please.
So Ancient Explorers definitely has the whole piece that we want to do, like Jason was saying, is we want to team up and deliver something of high impact and something that's going to help facilitate rewriting these books, basically, rewriting these history books. And, we want to create that community where, we have that, and so Ancient Explorers was always kind of just set up, as to figuring out how we can go to more of these places and educate people around that location, what the information was around that location, possibly preserve that location and do research on the location and then spread that knowledge, basically. Because we do believe that there is something from the past that is a link to our future. And so, that's what Ancient Explorers is really, really, really core mission is to give that back to people. And there's a nonprofit that's tied to this as well that's going to go out to actually going to these locations and put money onto the ground to actually make these things a reality and go to these different locations, such as Dwarka, or it could be Machu Picchu, or it could be Stonehenge, or it could be all these, the pyramids, or whatever, the places that we as a community decide on. And so that's the real power behind what Jason and I have put together, is that it's turned into something beyond us, and we're just here to serve and to provide and to make this thing a reality.
Awesome. Wow. So, we've obviously got the Dwarka documentary coming up, but we're talking perhaps documentaries for maybe every one of these sites.
Exactly. Yep.
And even the capability to bring members or the public out there, those who are able to make it.
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Do you guys have any sites in mind for the future beyond Dwarka after this documentary is released? What we might see from Ancient Explorers in the near future?
Good question.
Yeah, we've thought about a lot of different locations. Ultimately, it is going to be a community-based decision. And so when we do launch the documentary, we're going to be opening up the site. And once the site is open and the community is launched, well, we let the audience decide kind of where we go.
Wow.
And that's how it's going to kind of be based, and it'll be kind of cool like that, because then it turns into what do we want to discover as a whole.
Wow, I can definitely see there being a huge support for this. Real quick, just for the audience out there, let's get the information about the Dwarka documentary out, because I think what you guys are doing with that is really cool, as far as there being a 24-hour period of a free screening. And it's on May 1st, and then you sign up at ancientexplorers.com/screening, correct?
Yep.
So that'll be available on May 1st for 24 hours for anybody that is wanting to watch. I certainly will be watching. I've already signed up. All right, cool. Well, did you guys want to speak a little bit about the Ancient Explorers? Get into that a little bit more? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, Jason, you want to talk about the Ancient Explorers and what we're going to be doing in the Ancient School and the transition? And
Sure. Well, I think if it's okay, guys, I'll just kind of briefly give a little bit of background about myself, in case Amish kind of gave an intro there, and I'll just
please do.
So, my involvement in these topics started when I was in college. I just turned 40. I'm ashamed to say, but not so much. But when I was, let's say around 20, I became interested in the idea that there was a face and pyramids on the surface of Mars. And while attending college in San Diego, turns out that the principal photographer that attaches the cameras we have currently orbiting Mars for the last decade is mainly from one company, Malin Space Science Systems, which was also located in San Diego. So, just as a college student, I was a surfer, a waiter, not interested in history or ufology in any way. But someone had mentioned to me that there was a face in pyramids on the surface of Mars. So having found out that Dr. Mike Malin and Malin Space Science Systems was also in San Diego, I called Dr. Mike Malin, again, as a layman college student, and asked him, is this face in pyramids on Mars actually there? Is it artificial? And he said, no. These are all natural objects sculpted by sand and wind. But then I was able to find 5 or 10 peer-level review scientists with PhD credentials in image analysis. They might not work at NASA, but they did say, yes, this face in pyramids, this region called Cydonia, does merit further investigation. And one guy in particular, a Dr. Mark Carlotto, essentially did a lot of fractal analysis, which I just like that word, fractal analysis. Yeah. What he did was he developed these mathematical algorithms where, using Russian satellite telemetry, images from a satellite looking at Russia, he would run these fractal analysis where it would say, oh, look, that's actually some troops or a tank covered up by some tarp or some shrubbery. So his fractal analysis would actually identify artificial intelligence. When we ran those same fractal algorithms on the telemetry of Mars, the satellite imagery of Mars, the face in pyramids come out to be a 98% probability to be artificial. Now, NASA never did any type of outwardly public research like that, but it was available. If people actually looked at, this, that there were other people that studied this and said, it does merit further attention. So really, for me, I started to realize, well, wait a minute, I'm looking at something on another planet. We have structures all over the Earth here that we still don't understand who really built them. So that's really what started my interest. And I spent several years focusing on ancient Iraq. We've heard of it called the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, Babylon, but currently southern Iraq. And then after really looking at Iraq and their ancient history for many, many years, I started to branch out to other cultures. And so this really starts to tie into what we're doing today. And as I mentioned, when we talk about an Atlantis of the East, like with Dwarka, the whole idea of this term Atlantis reflects on the idea of some lost civilization. And just so that your audience understands, Trevor, to make this a little bit more being able to touch it, what we're seeing is evidence of this lost culture. And I'll give you some examples. Most of the sites around the world, some of these remote sites, Easter Island, Rapa Nui, these heads that are there, we call them the Moai heads. They're not actually heads. They're actually full bodies. Recent excavations have dug the ground around the heads. They dug up the heads and found that it's a full body, not just a head, but they've been buried underground. And this being that you see depicted is a long, slender being, hands always wrapped at the waist. And that's at the remote island of Rapa Nui. In Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, one of the most recent findings that we have, going back 13,000 BC possibly. Again, these long, slender beings, hands wrapped at the waist. Now, even the Sumerians and various other cultures depict these in figurines, small modeled people, little statues. But there is evidence of this lost civilization that seem to have affected all the ancient cultures. And really, the only way we're going to find the answers, Trevor, is not in a history book, not watching a NASA webinar. We have to go on location. And so that's exactly what we're aiming to do with Ancient Explorers.
Yeah, that's definitely exciting. I'm glad that you guys were able to bring that to our audience. One thing that you kind of touched on there that I wanted to get into, was what would be the implications of if we were to sort of find some hard evidence of or something a little bit more glaring perhaps that the public might be able to look to, aside from the The most obvious one being the history books are probably all a little bit off. What would be some of the implications of, I guess, just the ancient astronaut theory as a whole?
Well, let me take a stab at that quickly, Amish, if you don't mind.
Sure, no, go for it.
I think what we're looking at here is, I love the show Ancient Aliens, Trevor, and I'm very grateful to be a part of the show. It's in its 6th season now, and something instinctively tells me there'll be more seasons. But to be honest with you, it's not for me so much about the ancient alien theory. Ancient astronaut theory implies beings coming down from the skies, and that's definitely part of this. Every culture around the world depicts beings with flight, whether it be the ancient Indians depicting Vimanas, the ancient Sumerians depicting the Anunnaki flying in rocket ships, the ancient Mesoamericans showing King Pakal in a rocket ship. But there's a bigger picture here, Trevor. And what we're seeing is that there is a lost cycle of time. Now, the Mayans got a lot of publicity because of their calendar being so accurate. I'm going to throw out a few terms, but we can't cover it in full length in tonight's show. People have heard of things like the Golden Age, the Dark Ages. Right now, what we have is a larger cycle of time that all the ancients were aware of, over 30 cultures. Today, we call it the precession of the equinox. And this is a really key term, Trevor, because it seems that all the ancient cultures, over 30, built megalithic monuments that align to certain star constellations. It's a pattern of repeating alignments to commemorate or acknowledge this third cycle of time. And I'll quickly touch on it tonight, but again, we'll probably have to come back on your show and...
No, that would be great.
So there's 3 cycles. Again, Plato called this the Great Year, and you can symbolically see this throughout history in great scholars that were aware of these 3 cycles of time. The first cycle is very simple. We're spinning on our axis. Earth spins on its axis. That causes us to have day and night, 12 hours of night, 12 hours of day. We don't realize it, but when it gets dark out, we go to sleep. Our subconscious kicks in. This is an astronomical effect. Effect number 1. Effect number 2, we're orbiting the sun. Our Earth is orbiting the sun. And as we do that, seasons change, temperatures change, animals migrate, all types of things physically change as cycle number 2 takes place. We're orbiting the sun. So all the ancient cultures and many scholars were aware of these cycles, Copernicus, Galileo, but there's a third cycle. And right now we call it the precession of the equinox. Our science is trying to figure it out, and they just don't have the answers. New research is surfacing to prove the idea that the precession of the equinox is possibly based on the fact that we are a binary solar system. We have 2 suns. Again, many ancient cultures were aware and depicted knowledge of us having 2 suns. And so again, this isn't a topic we don't need to talk about tonight, but this larger cycle of time, this third cycle caused by the orbit of our 2 suns. And again, if you think about that for a second, what I'm saying is that our sun isn't stationary. Our sun is literally in orbit around another sun. So if our sun is doing that, all the planets, including us on Earth, are going along for the ride and moving through space with our sun. It's a very heavy concept, but people can look at a site called the Binary Research Institute. It's another partner of mine named Walter Cruttenden, who's been looking into this with several other ex-NASA employees. But it's a much more accurate model that explains this larger cycle, which is 24,000 years. The precession of the equinox that we have now is the division of the heavens into 12 constellations. Right now we're in the age of Pisces, the symbol of a fish. And each constellation lasts about 2,000 years. So it's like a large celestial clock. And we repeat this cycle every 24,000 years. Many of the ancient cultures were aware of this cycle. And it seems to be a significant part of the ancients' knowledge that we're now just starting to decode.
All right, a couple questions on that, and I might be way off on the first one here, but the second sun, that wouldn't be what the ancient Sumerians referred to as Nibiru or Planet X, would it? Am I way off there?
You're not way off. This is a topic that gets complicated and confusing. Nibiru is an actual planet. It's probably orbiting our sun as well as that second sun, hence why it can go out on a 3,600-year orbit. But Nibiru is not our second sun. Nibiru more than likely is orbiting both our suns.
Oh, wow. And secondly, are we going to be coming to the end of this 24,000-year cycle soon? Is it within the next 150 years or something along those lines?
We're just going into another age, which is the age of Aquarius.
Okay, so we're going into another 2,000-year period.
Correct.
Okay.
And we're on the upswing, meaning we see some very interesting similarities with ancient technology that prove this cycle. I'll give you an example. You know, as Amish pointed out earlier, the Mahabharata talks about aerial battles, literally technology and missiles and flying machines happening in 3000 BC. Well, the Sumerians talk about the Anunnaki and aerial battles happening between them in 3000 BC. What's interesting is that 3000 BC, the Sumerian culture, the Egyptian culture, 2500, 3000 BC, we see high evidence of astronomy and technology. But what happens? We then go into the Dark Ages, Game of Thrones on HBO, if you will. Mm-hmm. We forget all of this knowledge. We lose all of the understandings of astronomy. Not until the times of Copernicus and Galileo do we start to relearn. Now we can see where we are now. We're just about even with the Sumerian culture, but thousands of years later, coming out of the Dark Ages, now on the upswing, still about 8,000 years from the Golden Age, but we're back on the upswing. And everyone can feel and see that exponentially things are increasing. Knowledge, spirituality, as you mentioned, people's interest in these type of topics.
Yeah,
it's all being tracked because potentially an astronomical cycle that affects us very subtly. And I'll give you one last analogy on this point. We got an insect here on Earth called a mayfly. The mayfly only lives 24 hours. It lives and dies in one day. So imagine if a mayfly is sitting there on a cloudy day and another mayfly flies up and says, you know, I've heard of this rumor of sunshine and a breeze. I don't see it. They both die within 24 hours. Does that mean that the sun and the wind does not exist? A 24,000-year cycle says that humanity goes through a rise and fall of civilizations. And our 100-year lifespan, we're having a hard time comprehending what the ancients seem to have been aware of and comprehended beyond what we understand yet.
Wow. So definitely a lot to swallow there, but it is encouraging, and it does speak to something that we talk to a lot on the website as far as this sort of global awakening, we like to call it, going on right now.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And it's being coincided by we seem to be advancing exponentially in technology. It's pretty exciting for sure.
Yeah, definitely exciting. It's amazing how fast everything is happening too, and more information is getting out, allowing other people to be informed. And yeah, it's amazing. We're at an amazing time right now.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird story, but I actually began with Ancient Aliens. I was a huge fan of the show and started doing a little bit of research on my own and sort of went down the rabbit hole from there. And I probably wouldn't be here doing this interview if it weren't for that show. So definitely a lot going on, and it's just really exciting to watch. And that's why I think that, the news that you guys just, let us have for our audience as far as the Ancient Explorers and what you guys are going to be doing with that is super exciting. I think that you guys are going to have a ton of support from that. I will certainly be watching. And, just a lot of really exciting things going on right now.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll quickly circle back to your gold comment just so that didn't forget you there. Gold is a very interesting part of the Sumerian story, which for another show we can definitely dive right into that topic. But it is very interesting to note that the original biblical tales of what we have in the Christian version of the King James English version, right? The Bible in English is a New King James Version. There was also the Old Testament in Hebrew, but there were also predated from those texts Sumerian and Akkadian versions in stone that talk about this biblical tale of Noah's Ark and Adam and Eve, but there's also a gold part of that story. And the Sumerian version talks about why the gods originally came to Earth, which was to mine gold. They explained that their planet Nibiru was its own rise to a technological civilization, the Anunnaki, had damaged Nibiru's atmosphere. And to patch the atmosphere of Nibiru, they used fine particulates of gold. Now, we know that gold is an excellent insulator. We even use it in a lot of our spacecraft and even to line the visors, helmets of the astronauts. So gold was potentially why they came here. And they explain in some of these ancient Sumerian tales that are still recorded in stone unchanged, like the Enuma Elish, tells why the Anunnaki came here. And while trying to mine the gold originally out of South Africa, they found these deep veins of gold. They realized that mining the gold was a great toil. And so they created what they said was a being that they fashioned in their image and in their likeness, just like the Bible, but predating the Bible. They created a worker being to mine the gold for them. Now, not to get deep into this topic, it's very interesting to realize that maybe from a genetic level, we really like gold. If we look at the way we treat gold today, if someone gave you a bar of gold and you were holding it, you'd be like, gold!
Yeah.
So maybe there's literally something genetically programmed into us to like gold.
Mm-hmm. Just to kind of wrap this up, and then we'll kind of bring it full circle and plug any websites or social media that you guys want to get out there. But so do you think, and you can give me a short answer, that this Anunnaki story, is that sort of have anything to do with the missing link in our evolution?
I personally, here's the way I'd answer that. I stand by this answer 110%, Trevor. I've looked at this upways, sideways, and my good friend who passed away recently, Lloyd Pye, was an expert in the anthropological bone record of the Darwinian evolution theory. Mm-hmm. I have not seen any evidence as of yet to give a better answer than the Sumerian evidence of the Anunnaki and how they would take some type of a genetic intervention. If we look at the Darwinian evolution to say that we've evolved from Neanderthal man to us, no, there's this missing link. Everyone knows that. What's the missing link? Genetic intervention. And so the Sumerians are the first culture, the Sumerians and the Anunnaki, this story, they're really one of the first interactions with a human culture that we've recorded in these stone tablets that very accurately document how they created us in their image after their likeness. And so it seems very possible that, yes, the Anunnaki are definitely one of the contributors to the Human Genome Project. But that's not to say that that's not the only species or the only beings that we were having an interaction with. That seems to be limited to the Middle East in that time frame. There are many other cultures like the Mahabharata in India going back thousands of years even before the Sumerian culture. And these are just very esoteric topics, Trevor, that I'm not able to answer, unfortunately, but very fascinated by understanding that, again, some of these biblical tales have counterparts of artifacts that exist today and give us a much more deeper or accurate story of the full picture.
Yeah, definitely. I think that just kind of goes back to what some of the ramifications for this information might be. And it is really, really exciting to think that at some point, maybe in our lifetimes or maybe even in the near future, we might have some sort of an answer. But I did, as we're kind of closing in on our hour here, wanted to give you guys one more chance to just kind of talk about what's coming with Dwarka. We talked about that on May 1st there's going to be a free screening, but when is it going to be widely available beyond that?
So immediately afterwards, we're just going to present, how everyone else can get access to it, and probably sell it on DVD and maybe have digital access. And it's going to tie into everything Jason and I have been talking about, really. So yeah, we'll if you sign up for it, you'll get an email about it. So that's probably the best way to get in contact and stay informed about the documentary.
Excellent. And obviously we said that you can sign up for that at ancientexplorers.com/screening. Is there any other websites or information that you guys would want to get out there before we close up here?
I think, Trevor, really it's Ancient Explorers would be the way to push people in its simplest form.
Okay.
By giving us your email, you're going to get updates from our team, and we're going to, of course, come back on your show and discuss some of these topics in detail, but definitely participation in Ancient Explorers is going to allow people to have, firsthand access to things as we uncover them. And as we mentioned, if it so suits you, come along with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Really exciting information. I am absolutely honored that you guys, gave that to our audience, and it just really, really stoked to see where this all leads.
Cool. Appreciate it. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely want to come back.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be in touch, and we'll get you guys back on here soon. And looking forward to watching Dwarka, as I'm sure many of those listening are. And gentlemen, thanks a lot for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Right. Have a good night.
Good night.
There you have it, folks. Obviously, a lot of really cool information in that podcast. And I am truly, truly excited for this Ancient Explorers project, so I'm definitely going to be following that myself as well. We'll probably be keeping tabs on it over at vibinhigher.com. Beyond that, make sure you get over to ancientexplorers.com so you can get your free screening of Dwarka, Atlantis of the East. That's going down May 1st, and you don't want to miss it. So I hope everybody enjoyed. That's it for us now. We'll see you next time on the Vibin Higher Podcast.